Hi guys, Spartan765 here. Today I'm doing a video, just basic, a basic video on in-home gunsmithing and in-home, maintenance of your firearm. And when I say gunsmithing, obviously, I'm an amateur gunsmith. I would consider a fairly good knowledge on firearms, how they work, and what their limits are and what's safe. If you are not 100% satisfied in a modification you make on a gun is safe, then don't do it. Okay, that's the legal disclaimer. So you don't. Obviously, too, don't do any illegal modifications in your firearm. Check your local laws. But this is mainly going to go over because not everybody has, a couple $1,000 to drop on gunsmithing tools. And there is a lot of different specialty tools out there that make gunsmithing, taking apart, maintaining your firearm so much easier. And there's also a lot of tools at home that you can use instead of buying those expensive tools. And I'm going to go over that today and just some basic tips to save you money on in-home gunsmithing. And this is going to go over basic stuff like how to take your, taking apart your gun, popping pins out, screws, drifting a sight on a handgun without getting one of those stupid sight adjusting tools or sight drifting tools. And what I'm going to start out with here is you got a 870 shotgun. And this is a common, very, very common shotgun. But this is going to pretty much be used as the one for the pin example here. Now, I've seen so many guns before, guns of friends, and just different guns in general, used guns, where these two pins here are so beat up and the finish is scratched all around the pin, it's just ridiculous. Now, there is a very easy way to take these pins out without damaging the finish. And that is very simply by either using the proper sized carbon steel flat-tipped pin punch. Now, if you use the wrong size, you can scratch the pin. Yeah, this is carbon steel, and it's harder. But one very easy way to completely not worry about scratching the pin is to take a cleaning rod. Now, you'll notice the end of this cleaning rod is threaded here. Now, you're not going to damage the threads by doing this. Take the end of the cleaning rod, put it on the pin, and tap the pin out a little bit, and then you can pull it out the rest of the ways, or tap it out the rest of the way with a punch. But obviously, these are steel pins. This is a brass rod. It's not going to damage the pin, and it's not going to scratch the finish as easily as a steel one. If you use the wrong size pin punch, something like this here, you're more than likely going to end up scratching the finish. That's just an example of the pin punch. Now, when you're taking apart like a trigger group or something like that, or you're taking, like you got to pop a pin out to, do something, trigger groups, taking apart a handgun frame, whatever. Pins in general that are non-roll pins. I'll go over roll pins in a second here. When you take a pin out, you want to use the proper size punch, the proper size, and make sure that tip is flat. That's a big deal right there. If that has to be flat. Don't use a nail punch to punch out pins in a gun. You're going to damage the pin, and you're more than likely going to damage the gun. Use a pin punch. I see that all the time. Someone will start popping out a pin with a nail punch, and they'll damage the pin, and it just don't work. Now, when you're punching a pin out, don't, you want to obviously make sure the punch is straight. Don't bring the hammer down, like Thor or something, right away. You don't want to just beat the shit out of the pin in the first hit. Give it a few taps, like something like that to get it started. You don't want to, just try and get it out in one hit, because that will damage the pin and damage the firearm. And you also got to realize, too, that if you try to pop a pin out like that fast, it's going to heat up. The pin will heat up from the friction and expand even more. So some pins that can be very stubborn, spray some anti-seize, some lube on there or something, let it sit overnight. And if that still doesn't work, your next best option is going to be, if you can't get it with a punch without damaging the gun, the next best thing is going to be some type of a press. Maybe an arbor press or something like that to press the pin out without damaging it. But again, that's getting into the field of gunsmithing where that's an expensive tool, but that, at times can be the last resort option for a rusted pin or one that has just been stuck for like 100 years in there. Other things are roll pins. Roll pins get damaged all the time. I keep on hand extra roll pins for my guns, the guns that have roll pins, because they get damaged. But one way to not damage roll pins as much And this is a specialty tool, but it's only about $6. This is a roll pin starter. As you notice in the top there, it's got about a, what is it, about a 3 millimeter deep recess in there to set the roll pin in. That's what you need to get a roll pin started without damaging it. And hitting a roll pin with a flat punch in the top, trying to get it started, just is not going to work, because you're actually just going to wreck the pin. You're going to spread it apart and mushroom it, and then it's just not going to go in. Again, I haven't stated this yet, but with pins, if you can, it's a good idea to use a brass hammer when you're trying to drive a pin out. It's going to make it so much easier. And the reason for that is because when you use a steel hammer, steel's a harder metal, and the harmonics and vibrations in a steel hammer are going to be far greater than that of a brass hammer, meaning that's going to be a hell of a lot easier for you to get that pin out using a brass hammer or a hammer that is not steel. Like, well, what other hammer is there? I mean, obviously a plastic or wooden mallet, isn't going to be very good. But a heavy metal, like a brass hammer, is good. And that is not a gunsmithing specialty hammer. That's just a brass hammer, brass mallet. And these can be a little bit expensive, but it's a good investment to get if you got a bunch of guns and you do your own work all the time. As far as, now, next I'm going to go over drifting a sight on a pistol or replacing it. This is something that a lot of people, they think, oh, I don't want to change the sight out of my gun because then I have to buy a sight adjustment tool, a drifting tool, all that stuff. It's just, it's an extra $200. That's just simply not true. There's a way you can do this with a vise without damaging your gun. All you need, obviously, is a vise. Doesn't have to be a massive vise. Can just be something tiny like this. That's all I really use this vise for, is just drifting sights. A belt, and your slide. And when you put the sight in here, you're obviously going to make sure we want to have enough room to drift it side to side. And you're going to want to make sure that the jaws on the vise, if they're not flat, flip them, make them flat. If they're not, if they're rough, as long as you got a good sized belt in there, it should be fine. You're going to want to make sure that the dovetail is in the center of the vise. That'll improve the harmonics a lot. You're not going to have, a lot of vibrations, making it difficult to drive the sight out. How to drive the sight out. You're going to need a brass punch. Now, brass punches can be very expensive, or polymer punch, both of which can run high in the dollar value. For a gunsmithing punch set, they can get up into the hundreds of dollars. But what I did is I just did something for free. And that is I took one of these mini cleaning rods I have, and you can do this with aluminum or brass. I always prefer brass. Cut a chunk off of one of them. Right there, you got a brass drift punch. Free. Just use a hacksaw. You're going to want to set the punch on there properly. So it's, set the punch on there properly so it's seated right. And then just drive the sight out. When you put the new sight on, what you're going to want to do is, the general rule of thumb is when you're putting a new rear sight on, the sight should be able to be pushed on by hand up to almost halfway or halfway. If you put the sight on and immediately you cannot push it any further by hand, then you need to hone the sight down a little bit. Like take the bottom of the sight and hone it down a tiny bit on like a sharpening stone or something. Not a lot, just a little bit, and then keep trying it until you get it almost halfway. Almost halfway or halfway. If it goes any further than halfway, like if you push it on from this end all the way to here, odds are that's, you got to get a different sight thing, because that's been it's not the way it should be, but that never happens. Usually they're stubborn and you have to hone them down. The Trijicon night sights, though, I've noticed they're generally pretty good. You don't really have to hone them at all. They go right on just fine. But some of the cheaper sights you might have to. Do not ever use a steel punch to put a sight on. Use a brass punch. You will damage the gun, damage the dovetail or the sight. It's always a good idea to put the sight on right away with your finger as far as you can push it. Make sure, this wasn't going to be a how to put a sight on video, but I'm kind of getting into it anyway. Make sure the sight is not at an angle. It's not, it's tilted, and then tap the edge of it with a brass hammer, very lightly, light taps. Okay. Another thing I'm going to go over with the hammer. When you're drifting a pin out, I can't remember if I went over this already, but I'm going to go over it again. Do not, if the pin will not come out, I did go over it already. Do not smash the shit out of the pin, okay? Do lighter taps like this to get it started. And you might have to do 20 or 30 of those taps to get it to move a half of a millimeter. And but if that's what you have to do, hitting it really hard is just going to damage the pin. I mean, yeah, you want to use a bit of force, but you don't want to, like I said, use overwhelming force to get your pin out. Otherwise, it's just going to be damage. All right, as far as taking apart your polymer frame, or anything with plastic, you're going to want to take extra caution. Now, these polymer frame pistols they got nowadays, like these M&Ps, Glocks, they're fantastic guns. I love them. They're very strong, very durable. But you got to remember, in the end, you are still working with plastic. These pins here, you want to be very careful when you punch them out, because obviously, around this hole where this pin is, this roll pin is in here, it's softer than steel. So you're going to want to be very careful so you don't scratch or damage your frame. Again, like I said, when you're taking apart your polymer frame guns, just use a little bit of caution. Obviously, make sure your guns are all unloaded. That one's unloaded. No guns in here are loaded except my carry gun. And my carry gun's actually even unloaded right now, as you can see, because that's the gun I'm just about to clean. That's why I'm using it as an example there. Obviously, another thing, if you're going to attempt a trigger job, I'm just going to throw this out there, please don't do it unless you know what you're doing. Because I have seen, on the internet, and I've seen people who've had guns where they take their AR-15 and they get the trigger down to where it, they get it where the engagement is so bad where you literally tap the gun too hard and the son of a bitch will dry fire or go off if there's a round in it. People, do not drop your trigger down that far. There's no need to have a 3/4 or a quarter pound or 3/4 pound trigger. There's just no need. I mean, honestly, a 1.5 pound for a match gun is light enough, or 1 pound for strictly for a match gun, a 1 pound. I mean, if you're doing a trigger job or you're getting your trigger any much more below 3.5 pounds in a carry gun, that's just starting to get dangerous. Even 3.5, I'd say, about 4 pounds. A standard Glock trigger, what is that, about a 5 pound pull on there? I mean, the standard Glock trigger is pretty good for a carry gun. Any lighter than that, you're just getting into not being super safe, or not being, safe as it could be. Not saying trigger jobs are bad. I've done a lot of trigger jobs in my rifles, especially my SKSs, to get them, the Mosin Nagants, Mausers, to get them, smoothed out for bench rest shooting. But yeah, if you're doing any action work too, if you're lapping your bolt or lapping your chamber, make sure you know how to do it right. You do it wrong, you're going to screw up your headspace. I recommend that if you plan on doing any bolt work in your gun or replacing a bolt in your gun with a different bolt, get a headspace gauge. These are, this is a gunsmithing specialty tool. What does it say the price in here? I can't remember. But these aren't expensive, people. These are like $15. I mean, yeah, it's but 15, 20, 25 bucks, is that worth blowing your hand off? Spend the extra money, get a headspace gauge, so that way you did the job right and safely. As far as, if you're replacing a bolt in an AK or an SKS, the surplus bolts, you never know with them. Just in general, get a headspace gauge. Not that expensive. Magazines. Here's another thing I'm going to go over. People do not clean their magazines. I have seen so many people have guns, and they've cleaned their gun, right? But they don't clean the magazine. And you get these magazines like, well, my gun's jamming up. It's perfectly clean, but what the hell's wrong? I don't know what's wrong. I cleaned it and cleaned it and cleaned it again. And then you take it and you push their mag follower down. Take your finger and you go like that, and your finger comes back out and it's black. Yeah, that's your problem right there. Magazines should be cleaned. This is a part of the gun. This is a gun part. This needs to be cleaned when you clean your gun. Magazines are so easy to take apart. In fact, these P-mags, you don't even need a tool. You pop this off here, spring comes out, and you just pull it out. I mean, that's really all you got to do. I mean, some magazines, Glock mags, can be pretty tough to take apart. I should do a video on that. I don't have a video on that yet. Glock mags. Let's see, do I have some Glock mags laying around? There we go. Glock mags can be a pain. You got those tabs down there, and then what you got to do is you got to push this in, or there's a little plate underneath here. You're pushing that circle down in to get the plate sideways. If you're strong enough, you can pinch these together with your fingers and push it off. Otherwise, you can use, put something in a vise to push these together and then slide it off. I don't know why they did that. Make their mags so goddamn hard to take apart. But yeah, clean your mags. Don't forget that. And for some reason, if you have a gun where your magazines, or where you cannot remove the floor plate, and there are guns that are like that, excuse me, like some of the older I got a 25 ACP CZ Duo. You cannot remove the floor plate on that magazine. The only real way to get in there and clean that, you're not going to be able to really get at the spring, is to take something like a cleaning rod, push the follower all the way down, and get in there with a paper towel and clean it the best you can. That's really the only option for those mags. If you force the floor plate off, it'll be damage. Yeah, that's just another thing, magazine cleanliness. I'm going to go over that in a separate video too. Mention it in this video. Got a little sidetracked. That's nothing new for my videos. I get sidetracked all the time. But anyway, yeah, sorry for the mess here. I figured I'd just leave it as it is. I'm not going to, tidy it up for a video. I don't really care what people on YouTube think about my tool arrangement. But yeah, it just means I work all the time down here on guns. So I organize it every once in a while when I'm bored, once a month. Usually I organize it pretty nice. But shit, I'm working. I need this tool, I need that tool. Just kind of, whatever. All right. But yeah, you guys got any comments or questions? Feel free to send me a message, Spartan765.